The first month had ended and the second month had begun. Mutation Day was in 3 weeks, and lately Pinkie Pie has been very busy in secret. But she had put it aside, and as something had overcome her cheery attitude, and she became aware and somewhat more protective, and possibly a little too aggressive. This wasn't like her at all. Mikey was worried about her health, as she hasn't been sleeping and she's been skipping meals. That wasn't the only thing he was concerned about. The skeletal pony hadn't been visiting them for the last few days, and the lack of food was really worrying Mikey. For once, he didn't even care of his hunger growing in his stomach. He ignored it and paid his attention to the pony he cares for. Pinkie Pie had dark circles under her eyes, and her mane was a frizzled mess. Whatever had her nerves shot up better get off of her because Mikey was getting mad. Mikey had managed to turn back into his original form thanks to Pinkie Pie teaching him how to turn back from his new Pegasus form. It was one of his powers he was taught by Pinkie. At the moment, Mikey was throwing out the last of the pizza boxes into the garbage outside and jumped towards the roof. Once on the roof, he stared at the night sky and its stars while deep in thought. He wasn't sure what to do at this point because Pinkie Pie had disappeared and he couldn't find her anywhere in the building. While deep in thought, Mikey noticed something not too far near from the building. Very vaguely, he saw a noticeable outline of something moving at an abandoned apartment nearby. He watched in curiosity as the outline became a silhouette of a girl when a light somehow came on. Curiosity was chewing him now as he watched the silhouette in silence when a feeling crawled in Mikey's chest. He was curious about what a girl was doing in these parts of the abandoned part of New York City. Silently, he watches just the silhouette of the girl move away from the window. Mikey waited silently for at least 5 minutes before the doors to the building opened up, and with a loud creaking sound accompanying it. And out came the girl, only she wasn't like any other girl he had seen before. She wasn't like Pinkie Pie, but she did look a tiny bit like her. Her skin was light pink amaranth color, like a mixture of pink and red. Her light pistachio green, light green, and lime green streaked spiky hair was blowing with the wind a little, while a pair of raspberry headphones were placed over her ears. Her goldish amber eyes had Arctic blue eyeshadow, while she looked around the place, fascinated by the old and city buildings, even if some looked like they were collapsing. The girl was smiling with genuine curiosity while walking around the streets. She looked around on the empty sidewalks and silent streets, aware she was alone and vulnerable for any kind of danger. Mikey watched before her eyes averted to his direction. Alarmed, he quickly jumped away and ran to the door of the building. Though he didn't know that 2 cerulean blue eyes were glaring menacingly at the girl as she was approaching the building. Her high-pitched voice had been mixed with venom, hatred, and malice as she uttered the girl's name. Lemoncest! I think this is the last one, Lemonzest confirmed. She had explored every inch of the previous building she had entered, and she was a little creeped out. But she wasn't as scared as she thought she would be, though she knew she was alone, which could be very dangerous for her. Why did my friends have to be so ignorant and blind that we lost the previous games? She muttered under her breath. At least Pokey Pierce isn't like them all the time. He truly does love me. She smiled dreamily as a vision of her and her boyfriend flooded her mind. But her smile faded before she muttered something under her breath. And I wonder if he keeps trying to find that one girl of pink. But I hope Wizzy is okay after that rough battle she went through. She stopped in her tracks and stood in front of the building. The large building that towered over her looked pretty abandoned, but not quite 100 years old. Not abandoned as she thought. Possibly 4 to 5 years, she guessed with a slight shrug. She smiled brightly before grabbing her phone and turning on her camera. I am sure to get an A+ on this report, she chimed to herself. She took a few pictures of the front building of how tall it was. The windows badly cracked, and a big window on the side. Hey, these pictures would go great on my report, she said cheerfully. She reviewed the pictures on her phone, smiling proudly as they turned out great. But in the last picture, something catches her eye, and her proud smile evaporates into a curious frown. What the? She muttered under her breath. She zoomed closer on the picture and used a tool to lighten up the picture to see it more clearly. In the picture, barely seen through the darkness of the window, Lemon Zest saw what she could only describe as 2 glowing blue eyes peering through the window in what she saw as a glare. Those blue eyes looked like they were glaring directly at her. Lemon was startled by this creepy stare from the picture when a low creaking sound was heard behind her, which startled her a bit more. Her amber eyes switched over and saw a large metal door opened just a crack. An unpleasant feeling began to crawl up in her stomach as she slowly walked towards the door, but she shook it off and reached for the handle. Curiosity was eating away at her as she pulled the door open enough for her to slip inside. I hope there's something good inside, she thought in her head as she slowly slipped him inside the building. Inside, she was amazed of how big the room was, but she was more amazed that it was empty, and there was nothing but a flight of stairs that led to the rooftop above, and not onto another floor like the usual buildings were. The only light that made it seeable was the moonlight pouring through the wide open door behind her when a sudden fast breeze blew in, and a loud slamming sound made Lemon Zest squeak in fear as she spun around to find the door closed. Her heart was beating against her chest from the sudden action that appeared behind her, and the moon's light that once poured into the room was taken away, leaving the room pitch black. Lemon didn't want to admit, but she felt slightly creeped out. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a black flashlight before flicking it on. The entire room was now filled with her own light to help her see better than it is in the dark. Okay, maybe it's just the wind. Her voice cracked. She gulped nervously before grabbing her phone with one hand and held the flashlight in the other. She managed to pull herself together, but not good enough. She looked around the room quietly before her eyes settled on something that made her heart drop to her stomach. Pizza boxes, soda cans, and little pieces of confetti were all over parts of the floor. Lemon Zest felt that unpleasant feeling show up again, and it felt stronger this time. That's when she realized this feeling was telling her she was being watched. Her amber gold eyes searched around the room, searching for who or what was watching her. Is someone there? She called out. Hello? No answer heeded her call. The feeling crawled in her as she took one good look around the room before something caught her eyes. It was blurry and fast as well as it matched with the darkness. Fear started to eat her away as Lemon began to breathe heavily and her eyes shrank to the size of an apple. She tried to catch up with it as best she could, but she couldn't as it was too fast for her to keep up. A loud thud came over to her corner as her heart began to clash with her ribcage as panic was sinking in. But as it did, it stopped. Confused, Lemon turned her head back to the previous direction where the sound came from before, and she nearly froze at the sight. In an empty corner at the farthest end of the room was a little pony doll. Her pink coat looked like bubble gum, and her raspberry bouncy mane and tail looked almost like cotton candy, raspberry flavored. Its cerulean blue eyes stared at her unintentionally, and Lemon Zest could see her flank had 3 balloons with 1 yellow and 2 blue. Lemon felt comfort wash over her as she saw this doll. She thought it was adorable, yet something in the back of her mind was telling her that it looked familiar. Slowly but cautiously, she walked towards the doll, with complete silence. When she was close enough, she got a good look at her, and she smiled. Maybe this is what Pokey was looking for all this time. I thought he was looking for a girl that looked exactly like you. She reached down and carefully picked up the doll and held her in one arm while holding her phone in her hand and the flashlight in the other. She looked around and nearly frowned, and that nighttime was starting to settle in. Meaning her friends could be wondering where she was right now. I guess it's time I head back before it gets too dark, she suggested. With the doll secured in her arm, she began to walk towards the door. Don't you dare take her! Lemon Zest jumped and nearly screamed when something clamped down hard onto her arm. It felt so painful as she tried to figure out what was going on. She dropped the doll and whatever clamped down on her arm let go. Lemon began to walk towards the door when suddenly she let out a loud, blood-curdling scream. Something dug into her skin as it clawed at her like a tiger hunting down its prey. She fell to the ground and panted in pain when she saw the one thing that terrified her to the core. A little message written in her own blood was on the floor next to her. Been a while, right, Lemon Zest? Lemon Zest was now petrified as she raced for the door and busted out. She turned around to close the door when she saw the doll held in the air before she realized. No, not in the air, but held by someone's arms. Lemon Zest couldn't make out 2 white eyes glaring at her before she slammed the door shut. She panted out of fear before she realized she was bleeding. She looked at herself and saw what appears to be 2 semi-line curves in the shape of a bite. She looked at herself and nearly felt like vomiting. Her raspberry dress and small blue jacket had ripped into claw marks in it, and large bleeding claw marks were pierced into her body. In terror and fear, Lemon Zest managed to pull what little bravery she had left in her and began to run. She ran and ran until she was no longer in Mikey's sight as he watched her disappear with Pinkie Pie by his side. She had it coming after bullying you for a long time, he chimed. Radio, my savory pizza, Pinkie chimed back. Both of them let out a fit of giggles as night began to settle in.